Tune into thevoiceofstockton.org.
This is Barbara Berrigan-Perea with Delta Flows, a radio show by the Voice of Stockton and Restore the Delta. This is the weekly radio show where we discuss everything Delta related: the environment, water management, water quality, farming, history and culture, public events, recreation, Delta food, and the arts. Tune in to Delta Flows on KXVS, the Voice of Stockton, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube at KXVS Radio.
KXVS LP Stockton.
This is KXVS, the Voice of Stockton, and it's time for Connections. Peace and Justice Radio on KXVS, the Voice of Stockton, with your hosts, Bruce Giudici and Christie Kelley.
Good evening. Christie, nice to see you again.
Yeah, we're back. Here we are.
And here we're with a new issue of Connections, and I'd like to discuss the topics of the day, local and national, international.
Yep.
It's a concerning time for people who are concerned about peace and justice, and so we can just probably dig right in. Right this week, we're talking about what's topical now. Seems to be Korea and the chance of war. We're talking also about tax cuts for very wealthy people, and trying to ignore the tweets of our president, which are inflammatory and aren't constructive at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hit on the environment.
Yeah. So we can
things that are happening in national parks.
Yeah, we can start with talking about in our issue of Connections, the December-January issue that's out right now. A lot of these issues are things that don't change over time, or are going to be something we can impact over time. And one of these things is up in the foothills where I live, we are represented by a man named Tom McClintock, who seems to believe that that environmental laws like the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act have been at fault for the devastating the wildfires that have been happening in the last year or so, last few years. And so a very good article by John Buckley of the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center out of Sonora has refuted a lot of Tom McClintock's arguments that he put out at a town hall meeting, and also in certain fundraising letters that he's passed out, talking about how he's just sort of arguing that that USDA and the Forest Service is not allowing enough cutting in the forests, and that a lot of the problem is that if we cut down more of the forest, then they wouldn't burn. Of course, if you don't have any trees, then of course they won't burn.
They won't burn. And this is a great article that breaks down McClintock's arguments really in a clear way to help you understand the truth behind what he's trying to say is the truth, which isn't.
Indeed. So yeah, so you read through the articles. Look like you've made some notes on it, and I have as well. What do you come up with?
Well, McClintock is saying that the Forest Service is being kept from clear cutting the way they should do, so that because of different acts that have been passed in the previous administrations, and that if they were allowed to cut more, then there would be less fires. And like you said, that makes sense. But what really happens is when they clear cut, the forest that is replanted or allowed to grows back much denser and more difficult to manage. And so actually clear cutting doesn't help because it isn't managed well afterwards.
Because the idea behind clear cutting is to cut down a diverse forest that has many different types of trees, and to pretty much plant the same sort of tree that can then be harvested by timber companies later on, similar to the way that a corn farmer harvests corn. Right. And so that diversity of the forest is lost, and you have, if you've gone up to the forest at all, you'll see these clear cuts, and then you'll see these little saplings they're all just very densely planted. And they do give you a very a feel that you're in a forest, but what you're really in is more like an agricultural
a monoculture.
Setting. Indeed. And so then you open yourself up to bark beetle infestation in the same way that when, if you planted row upon row of corn in the valley here, if you had one pest that was taking over your crop, it would take over acres and acres and acres. And that's one reason why a lot of farmers are encouraged to leave some fields fallow, plant alternate crops, plant soybeans, then corn, then wheat, and rotate your crops as well. Whereas in a forest, you really can't rotate a crop because it takes 20 years for it to come off.
Grow.
Yeah,
that's a good article. People should pick up their connections and read it.
Definitely, and if you if in between the time you can go to www.cserc.org, and that's the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center website, and it's an excellent organization that does good work. So so that's a good lead-in. It's a good local article, and of course, we're all in the same watershed. That's the up in Tuolumne and up in Calaveras County is where the Calaveras River and the Stanislaus River comes from, into New Melones and into Hogan Reservoir, and actually Calaveras River comes down into Stockton. So what goes on up there comes down here.
We all live downstream.
We do. If you want to talk more about environmental things, back on pages 12 and 13, we discuss things about building a regeneration movement in your community, and this sort of touches on what is happening out at Puentes, out at the Boggs Track Farm, but pretty much talking about how you can change your own attitude or outlook towards how you grow your own food, how you can join people in your community, and organize. And so this is an article about how to organize something that is similar to the Puentes garden. Or what you can do is you can go out to the Puentes garden and just jump right in, because there's basic principles on how to learn where your food comes from, and this is similar to knowing where your water comes from in terms of your watershed. Developing a core group of 4 to 5 regenerators, and then develop a Facebook page. Get familiar with Global 41000 Initiative, which is trying to use as an outreach tool to recruit individuals and organizations to join a regeneration movement, and develop a plan of action to reach people. And you can just see that each of these steps is something that Puentes has done and is doing in our community. And so going out to the Boggs Tract garden and working with them, definitely encouraged. Even in these winter months, it's a great time to see what you can do in the garden in the wintertime.
And that's followed by a real quick little article on how to keep your water clean. And it's once again the basics about how what we do in our personal space is taken straight into the water system, and just remembering to take care with car oil, or even washing your car, paint, solvents, things like that, disposing them,
over fertilizing,
thinking about how you personally impact. And just one person by themselves is not going to make a dent when they change things, but if we all do make changes, it will help, as well as doing things that reach broader based, reach the corporations, reach beyond us. We have to take care of our own personal space as well.
Indeed, and on the facing page, a new study shows urgently needed 100% renewable transition is more 100% renewable energy transition is more feasible than ever. That even now in times that our current federal administration is pushing people to try to use more coal. internationally, there are countries and even in states like California that are pushing to make certain that we don't go backward into a dirty coal and fossil fuel generated energy system. And so the first sentence is a transition to 100% renewable energy by 2050 or even sooner is not only possible, but would actually cost less and create millions of new jobs, according to new research presented in Bonn, Germany. And so, these sorts of things, I mean, we know this in California because we see windmills every time we go over the Altamont. We see solar panels on everybody's roofs, especially more and more in the valley here. And if we encourage these sorts of developments, we'll be moving towards something that is, getting away from a climate change that we don't really agree with.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
But also, unfortunately, also on that page.
Yeah, this is a ridiculous, it's a very funny article, I think.
Oh, the one.
It's depressing, but funny.
The one is our air too clean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just the fact that anybody thinks our air is a little too clean to be healthy is kind of ludicrous.
Well, the idea is, it says modern air is a little too clean for optimum health, with the idea that if you have a little bit of dirt in your lungs, a little bit of dirt in your air, it makes you stronger. So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that's the concept there.
Okay.
And so that they're saying that people who are who live in areas that have more dirt and animal manure in their early lives, that they are healthier in terms of their lungs later in life. And so I guess that is an argument that some people are using to say, well, really we should have more pollution in the air because it'll make us stronger.
Great.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. And then, feeding up upon that same line of argument, America last, U.S. against the entire world after Syria agrees to join the Paris Accord. So the United States is the lone holdout in not agreeing to be part of the Paris Accord. Of course, we still aren't totally out of the Paris Accord for curbing global warming. It supposedly takes like 3 years for us to get out of that, and hopefully by that time we'll have a more reasonable administration that'll put us right back into it. And we do have states and cities like New York City and California and as a state, and Washington on the coasts that are working towards staying within the Paris Agreement. And California has passed landmark legislation on climate change. But still, the United States is leading from the rear, I guess, saying that, follow us. The new coal future is on the horizon. And, the 50,000 jobs that would save, which is, I read somewhere that the number of coal jobs is less than the number of people who work at the Arby's fast food restaurant. Wow. That, these are the jobs that we're trying to maintain. But of course, it's not jobs. It's profits. It's profits for people who own those assets. That, if all the oil and all the coal is left in the ground, what those are called are stranded assets. Those are assets that are not really assets anymore. They're things that people are not going to be able to turn into money. And so there's a lot of wealth that's tied up in not being able to extract that. And so a lot of those people are friends of folks in high places.
It seems impossible that we can remain out of it. I wonder what the next few months will show. It'll be interesting because that's just pretty ridiculous. It says here we're the second biggest contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and we're the only holdout.
Indeed. Yeah, and so it's I think in this case, it's the situation where the United States is not going to be leading. It's obviously not going to be leading, but there's going to be.
But at least we can be in there.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, there's going to be a tide, and the United States is going to be swept along with the tide, and as long as states like California, New York, and places, or Washington, places that are innovative and are willing to invest. the country won't be left. I mean, parts of the United States won't be left behind. And the concern is, of course, that we will lose jobs and we will lose our manufacturing edge in any of these technologies because we're essentially giving it up to other countries. And right now, of course, there's, China's making all of the solar panels and Germany is developing a lot of the technology. And so, we're going to be buying from them, and then that'll be more exports. I don't think the energy future is going to change drastically, but I think the United States is going to be dragged just by competition by the marketplace to get us back into
we'll
it.
Have to do it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the environmental news in Connections. Christy, you were talking about some homeless. Homeless articles.
The local news. I was really pleased to see articles, notes from our homeless. Fred Muskell has been doing a monthly writing class at St. Mary's Dining Hall for the past few months, and there's a sample of work that the writers have produced, and they're very interesting and very telling and give us a glimpse for those of us who are privileged and lucky enough to have our own homes, our own spaces. We are secure in that. To get a glimpse into a person's life who's not. And that's something to think about. I think it's important for us to always be aware, and I'm sure we're all aware when we see all the encampments around town, that there are people out there who do not walk into a solid building at the end of the day. And what is that life like? Right. How do you cope with that? And then how do we interact with those people? And so having a section from that part of our community is really important. And after reading those, and I really suggest you go pick up your Connections and read these beautiful writings done by these folks that are working with Fred. I brought one that I picked up in Portland. When I was there, there's a homeless newspaper that folks sell on the street. It's called Street Roots. And there is a poem that I've been sharing with everybody because it really resonates with me as a woman. It's called Gonna Be a Bear, and it's written by Carolyn Mead, who is a homeless woman. And she writes, "In this life, I am a woman. In my next life, I'd like to come back as a bear. When you're a bear, you get to hibernate. You do nothing but sleep for 6 months. I could deal with that. Before you hibernate, you're supposed to eat yourself stupid. I could deal with that too. When you're a girl bear, you birth your children, who are the size of walnuts, while you're sleeping. You wake to partially grown, cute, cuddly cubs. I could definitely deal with that. If you're a mama bear, everyone knows you mean business. You swat anyone who bothers your cubs. If your cubs get out of line, you swat them too. I could deal with that. If you're a bear, your mate expects you to wake up growling. He expects you will have hairy legs and excess body fat. Yep, gonna be a bear." So there's humor in life everywhere. So that's a really good contribution to our Connections, I think.
And I could read one of the small essays that's out of this one. We think of it as camping. There's these articles are not. They are just very. They're like snippets from people's lives, and it's from a perspective of people who don't have really a whole lot of material things, but they do have their life experience and have a willingness to survive in a very inhospitable place to live. So we think of it as camping by Chris Greeny. I'm talking about the reason I'm homeless. I had a house with my mom in Oakland. My mom died 5 years ago and our house was foreclosed. We had 4 rescued dogs and 3 rescued cats. Stockton was the only place for me and my mom's animals could go live. I got a trailer and moved into a warehouse lot to be secure for the warehouse. I had been here for 4 years. I used to have my trailer plugged into the warehouse for electricity, but the warehouse PG&E got turned off as well as the water. We just think of it as camping. So I'm going to try to be a pet groomer. I don't know how good I will be because all of my animals have short hair, and most animals that go to pet groomers have long hair. I will start training next week.
Thank you, Fred Muskell, for working with these
Indeed.
guys.
So we're going to be getting these notes from our homeless, and I just think that these in the winter months, people tend to think more of the folks who are living under the bridge and are a lot more generous and have their hearts, in the right place. People who do not have a place to live, it's a 365-day experience. This person here is been homeless for 4 years, and for whatever reasons, a person needs a place to be. A person needs a place to keep their stuff, to feel safe, to not be concerned that they're going to be beaten up for what little belongings they have on any given night by somebody who's either angry or on drugs or is just looking for something to do or has a gripe against homeless people. And so we really need, in these days when we're talking about massive obscene tax cuts for very well-off people and for corporations and for pass-through entities, which essentially is Donald Trump Industries. We're talking about being able to afford $1 trillion in debt for the next 10 years, $100 billion every year to pay essentially well-off people who don't need the money. I tell you, $100 billion a year would go a long way towards creating some homes for some people who don't have near nothing,
and creating jobs, providing viable work for people who can then continue to be consumers and buy and build their homes. And
I think Stockton is to be commended that they're working on some homeless plans, and I understand that in terms of getting beyond encampments and trying to build a place where homeless people can camp, where they can have maybe some sort of shelter, and maybe also have access to social services. If people need some counseling or ability, some medical help, dental help, that sort of thing, beyond what St. Mary's offers, then that's all to the good. But it really can't happen too soon. And it's understandable that a city like Stockton is going to be if tax dollars are being drained from federal coffers in order to reward well-off people, then obviously that's $100 billion every year that is being sucked out of the system. That's going to have to come from somewhere. And it's either going to come from cities or from counties, where cities could have some revenue sharing from federal money if that $100 billion were sent down to cities. That would be a way to help homeless folks. But where right now, if this tax bill goes through, which 50-50 chance. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, if people stand up and complain about the inequity and the how just totally wrong-headed it is, that maybe we can turn some things around. And one thing about this tax bill, it has shown exactly where certain representatives are in terms of what they think is fair and what they think is right, and. So anyway,
okay,
yeah. So that's that. Oh, and then speaking of people who are who are about to lose a connection to this country and to be deported, the Dreamer protection is that clock is ticking. Trump. Got rid of the protections about 3 months ago and said, well, we can't just rely on this presidential order. There has to be some legislation that goes through. And right now, there is a chance that there could be a bipartisan agreement on a Dreamer Act. On page 2 in Connections, we talk about the DREAM Act, which is the legislation of choice. There's actually 4 different.
It's very confusing.
It is very confusing.
This is another good article that helps explain things.
Yeah, and it'll take you a bit of time to read through it. It has to do with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is an excellent peace promoting Quaker group. Has come up with a very nice chart on the 4 different options that discuss the basic requirements for eligibility, the earliest possible eligibility to apply for citizenship, and the stages and requirements to adjust status for folks who would be allowed to stay here and to study and to continue on with citizenship.
And this just relates to people who have entered the country at a certain age and during a certain time, usually with their parents. It doesn't touch on the immigration process for many other people, but just this in itself is so complicated, and it makes you realize how many hoops people have to jump through to become citizens. And as I read this, I kept thinking, this country is built on immigrants. We are all immigrants, unless you are a Native American. We are all immigrants. And at what point do people begin to decide no more immigrants? It doesn't even make sense. This is what has made our country so great and will continue to.
Yeah, vibrant and interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
if we were all just the same, made up of the same Puritans who came over in the Pilgrim era, it would be a pretty darn boring.
Yeah.
It would be. I'm sure it would be similar to maybe Holland, I guess. Or
Well,
something.
they were immigrants. I mean,
That's right.
They were immigrants.
That's right.
Everybody here is an immigrant
But
from somewhere.
what makes Stockton so interesting is when you look
Right.
around, you see so many different cultures and so many different nationalities. Just as you walk down the street, and makes it a Stockton just a wonderful place to
Stockton
live.
is very special.
Yeah, it's
it
very
really
special.
is special.
Yeah. And primarily because of the immigrants that we welcome. And one reason that immigrants can come here is for California, it's still expensive to have a home here, but still it's much less expensive than the Bay Area. And so in terms of being affordable, the Valley is a place where immigrants can start. If they don't have a lot of wealth, they don't have a lot of income, but are willing to work and pitch in. It's a great place to be.
Another good article.
Yeah, it's very nice. So there was on page 5. There's a real nice article, and then along with this, there on the same page are a couple of essays
Mm-hmm.
by children in Stockton Unified School District, and I put this all on the same page because the Grit in the Garden and Everywhere Else sounds like it's from Puentes. It's from the Boggs Track Garden, but it's more that. It's more than just lessons on how to grow a crop. What he essentially says is there's no such thing as a green thumb. While talent is certainly helpful, many talented folks don't succeed without developing a strong work ethic. And so essentially is saying, that it's not so much just what your, God-given talents are. It's what you do with them and how you work them. And that your failures are way more informative than your successes, and that and what he says is ultimately never let a plant die without figuring out why it died. So, it's essentially if you fall down, try to figure out why you fell down, what you tripped on, and how you can get up again. And so the other two articles on this page are one is a very cute little one about a child who got a little toy chicken and was just so happy. It's just astoundingly happy.
We should point out that these two pieces came from the Friends for Peace essay contest.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And so they were finalists. And one was talking about a third grader was real happy to get this little chicken and was very happy. But then when I go from the third grade article, the third grade essay to the seventh grade, I'm not saying that the seventh grade essay was typical. It was pretty bleak and pretty dark, but it has a plot that develops, and you really ought to pick up your connections and look on page 5. But it is. It's telling that in this, I remember when I was in Stockton, that children here are exposed to so much violence. I remember when I was a substitute teacher back in when the Cleveland school shootings happened, and I was just shocked by the number of people the number of children who had been exposed to, or who had a relative who had been shot or wounded, or it was like 90% of the classroom had been exposed to violence, and these were children who were in 6th grade, and it's just shocking that that we have so many guns in our midst. We have so much inequality. We have so much. People are just not encouraged to get together, or it's difficult to get people to work together on things because there's just so much just keeping them apart.
Well, to also that there's, like you say, inequality. There's frustration. There's lack of any end in sight, and so things are bleak for our children, many of our children, and that's where the front page article sort of comes in with the light of hope that there are ways out there. There are, I don't want to say curriculum, but that I'm a teacher, and so that's how I think.
Before we get to that, I just want to remind you that this is Peace and Justice Connections, and we're discussing the most recent newspaper Connections newspaper, the December-January issue. Put
out by the Peace and Justice Network of San Joaquin County.
That's right. So anyway.
Yeah, Advanced Peace. Advanced Peace is a group of individuals who have developed a way to target stopping gun murders.
Right. Amongst people who are between the ages of 18 and 24 that live in poverty. And so this is a model that was successfully adopted in Richmond, California, and has resulted in a significant decrease in gun violence and gun shootings. And when this program was discussed or was brought up, the thing that people instantly jumped on was the stipend privileges, which is like the number 7 component of this program. And people are shocked that, how could we pay people who use guns? And the concept of reintegrating people back into the community involves getting them involved in the community, and you cannot be involved in the community if you're utterly poor. It's the same idea that that when people come out of prison, that you couldn't hire those people because, my gosh, they're bad people. Well, of course, if you don't hire people who've come out of prison, then there is no alternative to survive but to go back to old habits. And so in this case here, the program's 7 components include multiple daily contact with Advanced Peace staff. 2, creating a life map and developing goals with these people. 3, social service navigation and referrals. 4, excursions, meaning getting out of their same old places where they've been going. 5, internship opportunities, which would be working with organizations like Peace and Justice Network, maybe. 6, intergenerational mentoring with older folks and younger folks, not just people who are in their same age group. And then number 7, stipend privileges. And so when taken into account, when you take the entire program into account, the stipend privileges, which would be between, I think it says
after 6 months.
After 6 months, a monthly stipend of up to $1,000 a month, which is $12,000 a year, which is not even minimum wage. And we're talking about stipends that are going to keep people from doing the same violence that they've been doing in the past.
And I don't know if the stipend privileges include money management or not, but just like you say, if you don't have any money in your pocket, you feel pretty bad.
Yeah.
Try it sometime. Don't carry any money with you for a month. You can't spend, you can't buy anything, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
Where does that take you? And this says that The stipend typically ranges between $300 to $700 a month, and they're all provided through private funding.
Right. So, and even the private funding. I mean, I'm not all that. I mean, we're talking about right now. We're talking about $100 billion a year that we're borrowing to pay to give well-off people lower tax rates, and we're
giving stipends to those guys all the time.
That's right. Well, we're talking about $12,000 a year for I believe the targeted group is maybe 30 or 40 people, but and this is a pilot project on something that what we're trying to do is trying to avoid death, avoid people dying. And to think
and build our community, make a stronger community.
I mean, if for $12,000 we can keep one person alive, I don't think that's a poor investment at all.
Right.
If you just take a look at the total cost benefit, and then also just the living in fear. I mean, if you have fewer people who are out there with guns, who are feeling disenfranchised and disconnected from society. Not only do you have those folks feeling more connected to society and actually, helping to make a more peaceful world, but also you as a person who's walking down the street have a better sense of being in Stockton. So it seems to be a very very high benefit to cost ratio on this one. And we're going to be talking with Fathers and Families, which does similar sorts of work. I mean, it's not the same type of work, but we'll be bringing them onto a Connections.
And there are many, I think there are other things going on in the city, and it would be great to hear about what, there are many different ways to get at these problems, and this is one of the ways. It's not the end all, but it is a step.
Yeah, so when we're looking at some other issues in these connections, if you look on page 15, you'll find that one of the concerns that we're having is on media and the control of media. That very quietly there's been a gathering of. Right now for campaign finance. There is a very dark place where very rich people put their money in order to get people elected, and they just they have these bottomless pits of PAC funds that they can put their money into, and nobody knows who is supporting whom. And thankfully in California we just had a Disclose Act just for California, but California, as we know, is really not the problem right now. I mean, California has elected progressives up and down the ballot. We've increased our taxes in order to pay for our increased costs for say child care, and California is not the problem. The problem is that where small markets like Nebraska or North Dakota or Utah, those sorts of places, where it doesn't take a whole lot of money to sway an election. And on page 15, it discusses the how there's changes at the Federal Communications Commission that are being made now that will allow a company to not be locally owned, or allow a company to purchase local news outlets and not be locally based. And so there are large conservative media organizations. The one that's mentioned in this article is the Sinclair Broadcast Group, that will now be able to buy multiple local radio stations and TV stations and newspapers, be able to own all of the media in a given market, and be able to produce news or produce opinion that is not going to be able to be rebutted. It's going to just be broadcast by these folks from out of town who have no connection to this area, and who it'll essentially be like Rush Limbaugh 24/7, and that's the only thing you hear. And so that's the concern, and that's one reason why you'll want to support KXVS, because this is a local station that will not be bought by Sinclair Broadcast Group, I'm sure. And so, but
no matter how much money.
But it's important to be aware of this. The problem is that once it changes, it's hard to become aware of it. It's similar to like in Italy when this guy named Berlusconi owned all the media, and he was impossible to get out of office until he was so corrupt that people just couldn't help but notice.
It's kind of getting that way here right now.
You
no,
wonder.
but it is. I
Indeed,
mean, I don't think people
right.
are aware of how much pablum they're getting. And if anybody doesn't know what pablum is, it's a baby cereal. It's very dull.
Yeah.
But easy to digest, apparently.
Well, yeah, your football games,
Right.
All sorts of entertainment.
And you get the same perspective on what's happening. So you wouldn't get those homeless letters. You wouldn't get the news about the forest and what's happening, and you'd only get one side of everything.
On the facing page, Hope for
constantly.
Palestine requires action. Where do you
Right.
see the Palestinian perspective in any newspaper anymore?
Yeah.
And that's the concern, is that by 2020, which would be re-election time for this current administration, that this Sinclair group would have bought up all of the local media, and then we would have just one. We essentially Pravda, would essentially, or RT or whatever totalitarian news organization you can think of. That's what we would have. But, we would have freedom of the press in the same way that we have, so-called democracy. In terms of the way that, the way we elect people. And then also on the same page is talking about net neutrality, which is very important these next...
all over the internet right now.
Yeah, indeed. And there are going to be public hearings. There's going to be an outcry. This was the Trump administration's response to Obama's... when Obama, his FCC decided to go for net neutrality, it wasn't because they had some sort of burning urge to keep the net neutral. It was a big fight, and Obama was not. The administration had some good things going for it, but in terms of net neutrality, it was a fight. It was not just automatic. And so this is the same sort of thing. This killing net neutrality isn't going to stand, because for one thing, there's some really well-heeled people who are behind keeping net neutrality neutral. Google and some of the large the large purveyors of not the ISPs, not the Verizons and the Comcasts, but the folks who have content. They're the ones who want to keep net neutrality going, and so that and essentially what net neutrality is it puts a small business who is just starting up essentially on the same playing field as somebody who has a ton of money that who can advertise and buy more bandwidth. And so if you have a small business or a small organization that has information like ours, we won't be. I mean, it's easy for us to be buried now by Comcast if you have that as your opening, the thing that pops up on your screen when you start up. But if it takes like 10, 15, 20 seconds for a Peace and Justice Network to load, and it takes a half a second for Comcast to load, people are going to want to.
Oh, our attention span is not that long.
It's not that long, and people aren't going to wait for that. And so the concern is that folks who have divergent perspectives are going to be slowed down, and the ones who are just have the most bucks are going to speed up. And that sort of plays into this whole dark money thing.
So both are very important for you to contact your elected representatives. Yeah. Let them know what you think.
That's right. If we look at internationally on page 6, the concern that one of the major concerns that we have for this administration has to do with Korea, and has to do with the childish taunts that go back and forth between Trump and Kim in their I don't know. It's sort of like almost like a food fight, except
it is ridiculous, but it's also amazing that a man of his age and now position is allowed to continue day after day to continue this, like you say, taunts or like a bully.
Yeah, Little Rocket Man, things like that.
Yeah, just horrible.
Yeah, and it's been and all it would take is for right now. I think this week, the United States and South Korea are staging major military exercises, and all it would take is for the United States to say we're not going to do these exercises, and then the North Koreans have agreed that they will stop doing their nuclear testing. Of course, at this point, they have they've tested their intercontinental ballistic missile, and so we'll have one weapon that they could fire at the United States, nominally. But if we are to believe what comes out of either Pentagon or wherever, but still. To step back from the brink is going to require the United States taking the first step. The person who's in Korea is obviously very concerned about being overthrown, and because of years and years of the United States saying that he's going to be overthrown, and he's part of the axis of evil, and so on, and so. If there is going to be any sort of peace deal, it's going to have to start with the United States. And the concern is that with this president, the president that we have right now, does not back down from anything. He doesn't ever admit that he's wrong. Never admits that there is any problem. Thinks things are going great even when they're going horribly. And so the concern is that. What this article talks about, freeze for freeze, our best hope for peace, that if the American side completely stops big, large-scale military exercises temporarily or permanently, then we will also temporarily stop. And that's what the North Korean ambassador explained back in June, in a June interview. And that was back before all these tests. So if the United States had stepped back, and just if it still were to step back and to not continue these exercises, we might be able to avoid some real carnage and some really horrible destruction. Which
may or may not reach this country, but it definitely will affect people in South Korea
and North Korea
and that whole area.
Yeah.
No, it's chilling.
War is awful. I mean, and it's and I think it's to the credit of the people who are the defense secretary and people who've been through war, to say that that this is not an option, or that we're not. But it's not that it's not an option, but it's that it's not the first option. And I think if Trump had his way, he would be more than willing to go to war, unless of course Ivanka or Jared were to be drafted. Then
right.
that might be a different.
Maybe.
I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, we have a few more minutes, and of course the connections wouldn't be the connections that I put out if we didn't have a whole lot of stuff here about income inequality. And so on pages 9, 10, and 11, you'll find headlines like "The New Gilded Age: The World's Billionaires Own $6 Trillion." On page 10, how to stop a tax plan rigged for the rich, and that's a story about how back in 1932, a different era, a very different playing field, but also much more difficult to get a hold of your Congress people, where a huge tax cut or a huge tax increase on low income people, and in the guise of a sales tax that was in the middle of the Depression, was stopped by popular action. And so it's telling to us that we do have the power to be able to stop our Congress people if they are afraid, or they know that we're watching, and that if they vote for such a huge unequal tax grab that is going to impoverish people and cause all sorts of cuts, of spending cuts, in order to make up for the deficits, in terms of Medicare or Social Security. Those will be the arguments that are going to come out next. If people stand up right now and demand that doesn't happen, then there's a chance that it won't happen. And if they know that they're not going to be reelected, and that as soon as the new people get put in, then that this tax law will be repealed. There will be an outcry from business folks who will say, well, we don't like this uncertainty. We don't like where, you're saying tax cuts for one year and then the next year it changes. There might be, if there's a large public outcry and if there's an understanding that these things won't stand, the business community may not be behind these things anymore. Because right now, the business community is making tons of money. The banking industry is very profitable. The stock market is booming, which is the biggest measure of inequality in this country that we have. In terms of who has stock and who doesn't have stock, 80% of the stock is owned by 10% of the people. And so, a lot of people have 401ks, but that's just, crumbs off the table, really. Right. It's the ultra wealthy who are getting, who is driving the stock market to amazing highs because they know that they're about to cash in. So
if you can't join a march, you can call, you can use the internet. You can make your voice heard in other ways.
Yeah.
The other things besides the amazing articles is the calendar in every issue. And not only does it tell you specific dates and activities that are going on around, but gives you the Sierra Club meetings, Peace and Justice Network meetings, free yoga every first Saturday in Victory Park, single payer, all these places where you can get involved locally. And if you have something going on and you'd like it to be in Connections, you need to send it in to Bruce.
Yeah, and my name's all over the place in terms of emailing to me. My phone number 209-559-6279. If you're interested in working on the paper or distributing the paper, currently I think we have a line of somebody who can help coordinate that, but we need distributors. We need to get people. We need this information out, because while a lot of people do get their information from social media, a newspaper is a nice thing to bring along with you, to pass along to somebody, to recommend an article, and just also check out the references, because at the bottom of every article says where you can go to find more information. Also in the paper are other alternative media sources, and then also a listing of all your representatives' contact information, so that you can contact your senators, your Congress people, and president, and then and the state people as well. Okay. And so the idea is to try to get you connected with what we're doing, with your world, with what is happening, and so that we don't sort of slide into something where we are not taking part in our democracy, where we are still have hope.
Making connections.
Making connections.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Christy. Thanks for
Bruce.
the time. Okay.
Been great.
There's been Connections on the air, and have a good week.